Welcome back to another episode of Skip to the Point. Today I sit down with Scott Blostein. Scott is a guy who has been where many of you might be right now. If you're feeling stuck in your career, if you're struggling to get noticed by big companies, if you're spinning your wheels during the interview process, or even recently gotten laid off in your job, this episode is for you. In this episode, we talk about how to start prospecting in the companies you want to work at, how to go about informational interviews, and how to nail some of the most common interview questions. I hope this episode is helpful to many of you. And with that, let's skip to the point. So Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's just say that I want to break into an AE role. What's the first step I need to take for the hunting process?
I mean, it's a very good question. I think that one of the big things is also just like letting your network know that overall, like, hey, you're looking to hop into a different type of role or a company, just so like you never know where conversations lead. So that's really important as well. From there, like, most people I spoke with and would love to hear yourself included, like most people don't actually get jobs, especially tech sales jobs, by applying on job boards. You're going to be prospecting into a job. So it's really important to like build your network, have a really strong game plan when it comes to getting the right information to get in front of the hiring manager, much like you would in a prospecting experience as well. So having a really solid strategy to do outreach to folks to get in front of the right people and hopefully those decision makers that are going to be hopefully putting your butt in the seat.
I feel so strongly about this because there's so many people I speak with, peers, people that were on my team and got laid off, or they want a new role. They're on my team a couple companies ago, and they are stuck applying on these job posting sites, and you're kind of 1 out of 1,000. It kind of seems like it's more catered to have people like to keep people out than to have people come in, because I mean, how can you look at like thousands of resumes? It's just, that's just kind of impossible.
For sure. Like I'll tell everyone this, it's not a product problem at the end of the day. It's a marketing problem. Like if you think about like going down a grocery store aisle and seeing like hundreds of tomato sauce cans on what you're going to pick, like a lot of it is very, very similar, but there's specific ways that you can go and stand out from the crowd and do that. I usually say like when you just apply to a job board, like that's where resumes go to die. And a lot of my students have a much more stronger approach when it comes to breaking into the accounts.
Yeah. And it's funny because, in sales, especially when everyone's like, I kind of want a new role as a AE. I want to leave my company and go somewhere else, either for whatever reason. I want to go remote. I want to go back in an office, whatever the case may be. Everyone always says you got to prospect into these accounts. You got to sell, that's how you're kind of teaching them that you want to sell. You're telling them you want to sell. So we got to show them that you can sell. So I think that's kind of a buzzword, right? We always say prospect into these accounts. So what's like the first step people can take to kind of prospect into these accounts? Besides, we said network. So what's the next one?
I actually think back to my BDR days way back in Oracle. We had a sales trainer come in and he taught us this thing called 3x3 research. This is super impactful for 2 reasons, and I'll get into it and what it is in a second. But you want to be efficient with your time in this, but you also really want to be personalized with the messaging that you're coming in with as well to a particular prospect. So what 3x3 research is you take 3 minutes and 3 minutes only. You can set a timer if you need to. And you're going to try and find 3 pieces of relevant information that you can reach out to either an AE or a hiring manager, depending on the situation, to see if they can leverage an informational interview with you. So this can be anything that's, company-related news that you may have seen on their website, or maybe there's that person got a promotion, or there's like some blog article that they wrote about LinkedIn, or they wrote a post about it, and being able to cater and craft that message. So I had one student last week, probably since before I started seeing him, he's actually been trying to break into deal. And he noticed on the hiring manager's LinkedIn that she used to actually work at a winery where he's a waiter right now in a restaurant. And it was one of their top selling wines. So we crafted a message together talking about, hey, like I noticed that you worked at this winery before in the past. It's actually one of the top selling wines in my restaurant today. Would love just to chat about getting into deal and seeing how we can make things happen. And she got back to him relatively quickly, which is like, I love this. The personalization is awesome. Like, here's a link to go and I'll let the talent team know that we're going to get you in for an interview. So stuff like that really, really pays off.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. I think we all kind of have that story, even back to our BDR days of finding something so personal about someone, or either I remember one CEO of a account I was prospecting into back when I was a BDR, his daughter and I went to high school together. And so I was like, oh, hey, what's up? I know Sarah. So, to it's kind of making yourself seem human, right? Is that kind of what the gist is?
Oh, totally. I mean, like you want to do your research as well. Like the reality is like it's a very tough market out there and you want to stand out from the crowd. So that extra piece of personalization is really important as you go through the process. And you also don't want to make it self-serving as well. Like at the end of the day, people can read between the lines knowing that you would want to have a job. But I think if you come in, make it more about getting to learn from them, getting their advice, those type of perspectives really make you stand out from the crowd as well.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have done this, and I don't know if you've gotten these messages, I've gotten these messages where we're trying to find the personalization. What are some examples of good personalization, good facts to find out about someone? And what's things that, like you were saying, come across as kind of self-serving?
For sure. I know you had are you talking about like when you're actually speaking with them or in the initial message?
In the message.
In the message. I think like anything where it's just related to like quota, culture, pay, things like that. Those are very like self-serving as well. I think when you focus more on like where your passion shines out, that's really more important. So like if you wanted to ask about like, hey, I'm really curious, how like this trend is affecting this specific industry right now, or what are some thoughts that you're seeing within this particular role, or if you were me, how would you go about getting into this type of position? Those, like at the end of the day, no one likes to feel like they're giving bad advice. So being able to come in and just have a really good understanding, show that you're like open and willing to learn. Like people at the end of the day they'll know that you're trying to hopefully get a job there at it. So it's really just coming in and making sure that like, hey, if they're open to meet, and then from there, you'd be able to set the stage and work on impressing them.
And with, messaging people with the right thing, I think that two things are true. One, people also like love to help. I think it's kind of inherent of us. I don't know why. I think we can all think back to when we were that person reaching out, and we just really like helping people. One of the best advice I've ever gotten was when I was younger, and my best friend's dad was like, Alex, when you have a dream, tell everyone, because everyone's going to want to help. And so I think that that's probably the most vulnerable thing to do, is to ask for help. And with that vulnerability, not a lot of people do it.
Oh, totally. It's so funny that you mentioned that. I've started interviewing some of my friends for folks that are part of my community as well. And both of them said one's now a manager at Salesforce, the other one's a manager at StackAdapt. And both of them said, like, hey, when we were first getting into tech, like we just told everyone. And one person said, like, it was a friend from high school that he hadn't even spoken to in 5 years, and like ran into a bar and was mentioning it to her. And then she was like, oh, well, I work at Oracle right now, and managed to help him get in the door. And then the other person was like a friend of a friend's father that like was saying that he worked also at Oracle at the same time. I met both of these guys when we were both on the BDR floor there. They were both saying like that's how they got in. So advice for everyone, like no conversation's a bad conversation. You'll never know where it will lead. And it's funny how life works that way.
Yeah, and I definitely think if you lead with vulnerability, like, can you, I really need some help, as opposed to like, what do you think the job market is in this moment? Because they're like, okay, just get to the point. Why are you reaching out to me? I think that those relationships go a really long way.
Oh, totally. And then, like, you want to be naturally curious. Like, I know, like, being in an AE role, even a BDR role, like, curiosity is king when it comes to that as well. So just being able to learn from people, it comes off a lot more natural as well.
Yeah. Let's just say it goes well. The initial conversation or the message that I send via LinkedIn or whatnot goes well. They want to meet. So I'm assuming this is going to be what we call an informational interview. So what is the purpose of an informational interview?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Ideally, what you're wanting to do in like these informational interviews is just get a really good sense and sell yourself a little bit without selling yourself too hard. I know that doesn't make a ton of sense, but let me explain. So normally how these work is they're in 3 different sections. One, you start off like any conversation, small talk. So being able just to have like good small talk and get the person comfortable with you as well can lead into a good start a lead in a good conversation. And then you'll want to break this down into a couple different areas, really wanting to get a good understanding of like the trends that are going on in the industry, some insights, some advice, and even potential resources that you can get from them as well. So this is everything from like, hey, you know what, curious, like how did you land in this role here at XYZ company? What are some of the big trends that you're seeing impacting the industry right now? If you were me, what would you do to get into this sort of industry right now as well? So there's a couple different ways that you can ask that. You can even say like, hey, I saw this new technology was coming out. How do you feel like it's going to impact the industry over the next couple of years? Or like, what competitors are you keep you up at night? At least from those, you're getting a couple different information. One is hopefully you're seeming more naturally curious. Notice that like I didn't ask about culture. Like, there's so many things like Glassdoor and RepView out there today that I can go and find that information out easily as well. But also, like I was saying earlier, people want to be actually able to like go and help and also show that they can like give some solid advice as well. And people love talking about themselves at the end of the day. So really being able just to get people talking, get them rooting for you and having them in your corner as well is a really big piece to all of this.
Yeah. And with the people like talking about themselves, it's the most true statement ever. And it's the most important thing as a salesperson to realize. And I actually sadly think not a ton of people still know that, but you have the most power in the room when you're asking questions. I believe. And I also think that these informational interviews, you get so scared and you're like, okay, I have like a list of 10 questions I'm going to ask. Yeah. And then they end up just talking the whole time. And you're like, great. Okay. Like you don't even get to all the questions because I don't think many people are comfortable in the awkward kind of silence in a way. And so they'll be like, let me tell you about the company. Let me tell you about my role. And then they'll ask you a few questions after. That's kind of what I've felt about. Yeah.
I mean, you can even like go down a pretty big rabbit hole of just like, hey, you just got hired in this role. Like, what's the most important thing you do in the first like 30, 60, 90 days? And like, just sit back and like, you'll get a whirlwind of answers from that right there.
Yeah. And then with the things that they say, how important is that to kind of take into an interview?
I mean, it's definitely really important. Like, think about this as a sales cycle. Like, even as you go and get like conversations with, let's call them, your father used the term BTL, so below the line type folks that you're looking to bring up to executives. Same thing applies here from a interview as well. So you could gather information and be like, oh yeah, well, I remember in my conversation with Bill when I first spoke with him, he was mentioning that you're having a new product launch coming out recently. Curious to know, like, which vertical which customers do you feel like are going to be the best served by this? Like, bang on 10 out of 10 question to ask because it shows curiosity. It's also like a great curiosity question to ask in general. And just being able to like stand out from the crowd in terms of like, we're asking about like what work-life balance is or what, like what's your team's attainment at? Great insights that you could bring to the table.
I love that. So let's just say the informational interview goes well. They say, I'm going to introduce you to my manager that, of the position that we're hiring. And then you're in the interview. I think we all prepare for interviews, but the most important question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the most important question is tell me about yourself. Because I don't know if you might have told me this. How many seconds into the interview do they decide if they want to hire you or not, or continue the conversation or not?
It's the stat out there goes, I think within the first 5 minutes, 30% of the people know if they want to at least like continue the conversation or know if you'll be a good candidate. And as that progresses to like 10 or 15 minutes, that number gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think by the first 15 minutes, 70% of interviewers have already made up their mind. Wow. So it's really good having a strong first impression, everything from body language, eye contact, your handshake if it's in person, as well as like the tell me about yourself question, which is usually the first question that normally comes on the plate in interviews.
Yeah. So how do we structure that question?
That's a good question. So there's a couple different ways. I think there's like really two paths. I want to stress this though. What's really important of how not to answer this question is to talk about your resume. They already have the resume in front of you. This is a really strong portion for you to go and like stand out from the crowd. So there's two directions from this. You can tell a story about how you got into the room and how it defines you as a person. So, I really am really a curious individual. I was actually able to speak with a couple of different people on your team to gather the information to get here today. Another great way to go about that is also by breaking it up into three different parts. So talking about, your favorite part of what you've enjoyed most about your current role, your previous role, what you've learned, and why you're transitioning to this new role today. So, for example, if you're a business development rep and let's say you're trying to break in as an account executive somewhere, you say like, hey, as my current role as a BDR at XYZ companies, one of my favorite aspects is really uncovering new opportunities and really being able to identify potential clients and being able to learn about their pain points really is like one of the main reasons as why I've been really passionate about technology and helping them solve problems. And through my experience, I've gained so much insights in the importance of listening and understanding of people's needs. And this approach has really helped me exceed targets and building long-lasting relationships. I'm really excited about taking my skills to the next level. And that's really why I'm here today, so I can go and control the whole process from start to finish. And I'm particularly drawn to this company because of like the innovative approach they have in the industry or some of the things that they're doing in like XYZ pace. Those are the type of answers that can like open up a conversation and not really like recite your resume or give like a boring type answer. And I think it's also fine if you wanted to take more of a personal approach. If you're a human after all and you have interests and hobbies outside of work. So you can also easily sprinkle in a couple of those nods here and there.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that, so with that answer, it sounds like there's like three kind of elements. It was, tell me, this is where I came from. These are the skills that I've learned along the way. And this is why I'm excited to continue and work here at this company.
For sure. And I think it's important to note is like start this story off where it's relevant. Like if you're in your 30s,
high school.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm in my 30s, like don't start this off. I'm like, well, I was born in Ottawa, Canada. But no, like being able to like start it off from like a relevant point. So that's usually like if you're brand new to your career, talking about like your college self, or even if like you're more senior in your career, just talk about your last job as a starting point.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. So last question for you. And I know that I warned you that I end the podcast with, I love good questions. And I really, really try to think about good questions. So this is my question to you.
Okay.
What's one thing you did when you were younger that describes what you're doing now with helping people find jobs and new opportunities?
Yes, I knew the last question would definitely stump me the most. I'd probably say this, when I was a kid, I was super active and played on a lot of sports teams and was a captain of some as well. So I think for me, like, obviously just having like that team mentality and like being like a coach now in terms of helping people get into jobs have really played in from a sports standpoint. So everything from just like being a team player, making sure that like the greater group succeeded overall. That's probably where it all stemmed from subconsciously to that.
Yeah, we learned so much through sports.
Oh, it's crazy. And like, even like from like getting into a sales standpoint, it looks great even if you have any extracurricular activities that are sports, like shows competitiveness, shows like you're a team player. Mm-hmm. And like those are things that like you definitely need in order to be successful in the role.
Yeah. How I kind of phrase like how I was a tennis player, which is a single sport, which has nothing to do with like, I mean, kind of teamwork, kind of not, is that in college you're on a team, but your individual contribution is what it matters to the team. So like my singles match, if I lose that, our team loses a point. And so I'm like, this is directly related to sales because like my singles, my contribution and my quota contributes to the greater team. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Scott.
Thanks so much for having me.